From a man who was called upon by God to do something, but who never found out what, because God only pocket dialed me. Come on, God, I can hear you. I can hear you breathing. Hello? Hello? Speaking of God, I'm reminded of one of the Greek gods, namely Prometheus. He was the one who gave man fire and technology and was punished by the other gods for freeing us. In the book Prometheus and Atlas by Jason Rezadorjani, he talks about the etymology of the name Prometheus. Derived from the Greek words pro and manthano, his name means forethought in the sense of prevision, prophecy, precognition, and making provision, say, for the winter season. Prometheus is he who knows in advance. The termination eos is characteristic of proper names, and the stem methe is related to mathos, the root of such words as mathematics and polymath. This clearly connects it to Heidegger's Greek etymology of mathesis, or ta mathemata. It is the always already learnable in advance essence of modern science, whereby nature is seized in terms of the projection of mathematical spatiotemporality. The technical device that radically transforms things and places into objects and spaces allows for the anticipatory determination of beings through axioms. That last sentence stayed with me, the anticipatory determination of beings through axioms. So an axiom is essentially a formula, an algorithm that doesn't just tell you about the past or what's happening in the present, but also what's going to happen in the future. What would an axiom be? Take, for instance, Nietzsche's axiom that what does not kill me makes me stronger. This brief aphorism was arrived at by noticing a pattern. Nietzsche must have noticed that strenuous exertions, say on muscles for instance, led to those muscles getting stronger. So you can, with a reasonable measure of accuracy, predict that if a man is subjecting his muscles to stress, if it doesn't kill him, he's likely to get stronger. The axiom is predictive. If you understand it, you stand a better chance of being able to predict the world around you. Herbert Spencer talks about this in the 1870s. Back then, they used the term prevision for what we would use as forecast today. Science, Spencer was told, is the ability to recognize an algorithm that will help people predict the future with reasonable accuracy. The so-called laws of nature were misnamed. A better term would have been the algorithms of nature. These are systems that repeat, and if you understand the pattern, you stand a better chance of forecasting the future. For instance, even a little kid can discern the pattern of red, blue, red, and if I asked him what would come next, he would correctly say blue. Because he understands the pattern, he can anticipate the next object in the sequence. This isn't magic, this is just pattern recognition. And philosophy and science are all about cultivating pattern recognition in an individual. A great scientist is merely someone who noticed a new pattern, who observed the data and can discern an algorithm, which would help him craft a generalization based on an axiom. This ability to create and recognize a generalization is the artifact of a cultivated mind. Spencer was frustrated by bad historians who cobbled together the great man theory of history, whereby they tried to make events random and predicated on personalities rather than on systems. This is something that Donella Meadows said in her book, Thinking in Systems. In it, she said, "Don't think that you're going to send a single politician to Washington and expect change. It's not based on personalities. It's based on systems. If you don't change the system, you will change nothing." Herbert Spencer, in his book Study of Sociology, was trying to look at society systematically. He wanted to discern the generalizations, the algorithms by which events took place, and he excoriated the unscientific habit of attributing events to personalities, the so-called great men. The aforementioned Nietzsche gave in to this bad habit when he wrote, "A nation is a detour of nature to arrive at 5 or 6 great men." Herbert Spencer, by contrast, was less taken in by the so-called great men than he was by institutions that composed a society and how those institutions were systems that had particular patterns that could be discerned. As Donella Meadows said, all systems repeat. If it doesn't repeat, it's not a system. Our Constitution, for instance, is an algorithm that sets up repetitions, a system. For instance, every 4 years we vote on a president, every 6 years we elect a senator, every 2 years we install a congressman, etc. It sets up repetitions by which a society operates. Kind of like the previous example of red, blue, and so forth. If you're aware of the deeper systemic algorithm, you stand a better chance of being able to predict what happens next, something you can't do if you're trained to think randomly in the great man theory of history. Hear Herbert Spencer talk about his frustration here.
Thus the great man theory of history finds everywhere a ready-prepared conception. Is indeed but the definite expression of that which is latent in the thoughts of the savage, tacitly asserted in all early traditions and taught to every child by multitudinous illustrations. The glad acceptance it meets with has sundry more special causes. There is first this universal love of personalities which active in the aboriginal man dominates still. A love seen in the urchin who asks you to tell him a story, meaning thereby somebody's adventures. A love gratified in adults by police reports, court news, divorce cases, accounts of accidents, and lists of births, marriages, and deaths. A love displayed even by conversations in the street where fragments of dialogue heard in passing show that mostly between men and always between women, the personal pronouns recur every instant. If you want roughly to estimate anyone's mental caliber, you cannot do it better than by observing a ratio of generalities to personalities in his talk.
Drill down on the phrase, if you want roughly to estimate anyone's mental caliber, you cannot do it better than by observing a ratio of generalities to personalities in his talk. In other words, stupid people talk about celebrities and random stuff, and intelligent people are more aware of principles. The consciousness of generalities is, after all, a consciousness of patterns. Pattern recognition is associated with higher intelligence. As Aristotle said, a civilized man is aware of patterns, whereas a child or a savage sees reality as random, out of context. In Andrew Pickering's book, The Cybernetic Brain, he says that when AI was developed, the very first thing that they programmed into the computer was pattern recognition. Of course, as John Stuart Mill said, it is in the interests of tyrants to have a low level of intelligence and a low level of education. So the school system now tells you that generalizations are bad and teaches you to see reality as random. We see things like this. Pattern recognition is another name for racism and sexism. We're told we're bad people if we notice patterns. Erin Meyer, an expert in international relations, had to contend with this mindset, as she relates in her book, The Culture Map. In it, she describes the intricacies of miscommunication that take place when people from different cultures have to work together in international companies. Without being able to decode the subtle cues from other societies, misunderstandings and frustrations can arise easily. She relates how, in publishing an article about the idiosyncrasies of various Asian cultures, she received a comment from a reader saying, "Speaking of cultural differences leads us to stereotype and therefore puts individuals in boxes with general traits. Instead of talking about culture, it is important to judge people as individuals, not just products of their environment." In response, Meyer writes, "At first this argument sounds valid, even enlightened. Of course individuals, no matter their cultural origins, have varied personality traits. So why not just approach all people with an interest in getting to know them personally and proceed from there? Unfortunately, this point of view has kept thousands of people from learning what they need to know to meet their objectives. If you go into every interaction assuming that culture doesn't matter, your default mechanism will be to view others through your own cultural lens and to judge them or misjudge them accordingly." My point in this presentation is, beware of tyrants who try to con you into believing that pattern recognition is evil and that generalizations are bad things. As Herbert Spencer said long ago, if you want to roughly estimate anyone's mental caliber, you cannot do it better than by observing a ratio of generalities to personalities in his talk. It's the difference between someone guided by philosophy, logic, and reason, and someone whose worldview is shaped more by celebutards on TV. It's the difference between a civilized man and a savage. It's the difference between a free person and a slave. Generalizations are axioms that give us a three-dimensional view of reality, amassed as they are from past data, which allows us to see how the world operates in the present and how events are likely to unfold in the future. Without this faculty for pattern recognition, your world is collapsed down into just one dimension, the present, and you're left to wander around in the dark. How much more agreeable to the tyrant, willing to pull you along by the nose in any direction he wants. By the way, I just did an interview with author Penny Kelly for my Under the Iceberg podcast. It was about her book Robes. It was just uploaded. Check it out at thenewamerican.com/audio/under-the-iceberg.